This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. Charles Scott is leading a life of family adventure. In 2009, he and his 8-year-old son Sho cycled 2,500 miles across Japan. In 2011, his 4-year-old daughter Saya joined them to cycle the circumference of Iceland. And in 2012, the three cycled Germany, Switzerland, France, and England over 42 days. This summer, the family set off again to retrace the 3,200-mile Lewis and Clark Trail. They will drive the first 1,500 miles in 2 weeks, then cycle the next 1,700 miles in 6 weeks over the Rocky Mountains all the way to the Pacific Ocean. You can read about their adventure at familyadventureguy.blogspot.com. Charles Scott, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Charles, how did you get interested in adventure travel to begin with?
Well, I started off interested in endurance sport. So when I was a boy, I started running because my father did, and I kind of wanted to be like my dad and spend time with him. And so at age 13, I ran a marathon with my dad. It was actually my idea, and I just wanted to see if I could do it. And it was a very hard thing for me to do, but in the end was a great experience. And basically, I learned that even though you might be uncomfortable and suffer a bit, trying something difficult can be really satisfying, and particularly when you share it with your father. And so that started at a young age. I went on to do lots of different endurance sports. And when I became a father myself, I was still interested in doing marathons and Ironman triathlons and that kind of thing. But since I had kids, the training for those things took away time from being a parent. And I had an epiphany of, why don't I just bring my kids along and figure out a way to include my children. And that's when my son and I came up with the idea of cycling across Japan when he was 8 years old. And since then, we've come up with different family adventures.
Now, at one point in time, you were in the corporate world and you decided to leave that. Was that a hard decision?
It was. I worked at Intel Corporation for 14 years. And that first trip across Japan with my son, I was still at Intel, and I took a 2-month unpaid leave of absence in order to do it. And I had to convince my boss at the time to let me do it. At first, they were resistant. But then in the end, actually, Intel sponsored the trip, so I was able to figure out a way to make it work. And in fact, that's something I recommend for a lot of people to do, even if you're in the corporate world, is to come up with ways that maybe add a little adventure to your life and in a way that can even complement your career. And I was able to kind of pull that off. But when I was in Japan traveling with my son, the feeling I had was how quickly time was passing, and I saw how I could basically, work a lot, and my children would grow up and be gone before I knew it. And I decided that while they were young, I would rather figure out a way to spend more time with them. And I came up with the idea of basically doing family adventures together and writing about it. So it took me about 2 years to figure out how to leave the corporate world, and I talked a lot with my wife about it. We saved up money and figured out, whether or not it was possible. And in the end, I did. And the hardest part, of course, is just giving up the financial security that you have in the corporate world, and some also the ego, because I did quite a good job and some prestige. But this, in the end, was felt much more satisfying.
How did the idea for the Lewis and Clark trip come about?
Well, as you mentioned in the introduction, we'd already cycled across Japan, Iceland, and Europe. And since we're from the United States, I thought we should do something in the United States that would be interesting. And on these trips, it's not just about the physical challenge. That's an important part. But I always link either a charitable cause or some other, maybe a scientific element to it. And what I love about Lewis and Clark is, one, it's a historically significant expedition, over 200 years ago, and it represents the expansion of the United States westward. So I thought it'd be great for my children to learn about that, and I was always fascinated by it after reading the journals as a boy. And there's also a scientific component to it, because Meriwether Lewis kept detailed journals about the plants and animals that he observed. And so one of the things we're doing on this trip is looking for the plants and animals that he documented in his journals. And we're also working on a roadkill project where we document the roadkill that we see and submit it to the University of California at Davis, and they have a database where that information is used for Department of Transportation folks to identify areas where they might be able to reduce the amount of roadkill, which, both helping save animals and prevent accidents.
When you do the roadkill project, do you only have to worry about roadkill on the side of the road that you're cycling on?
We look on both sides. If it's a busy road, and we do sometimes ride on highways where there's a fair amount of traffic, and I think it's unsafe, then we'll just skip it. So we don't have to document every single animal that we see. I make a judgment call, and if it's on the far side of the road and it seems unsafe to cross, then we won't do it.
Are you getting any feedback from the professor on the data that you're sending in?
Yes, so we're in daily contact, and in fact, what I'm doing is I'm sending the photos by email, so he receives them in real time if I have an internet connection, and if not, just whenever I get it, he gets all the photos. And I label them, each day, photo 1A, 1B, et cetera. And then sometimes I'll say, I think this is a particular animal. Sometimes it's difficult to tell, or I just want to make sure he can, he has whatever data he needs to help to analyze it, because he's only seeing the photos. And so what I do is I put a 6-inch long tube of sunblock next to the animal so that he has some sense of scale. And then I, might say, this is a magpie, for example, or a bird, or I'll say, this looks to me like a rattlesnake or something. And so I give him some context as a starting point, and then he'll analyze it, maybe look at the mandible or the other telltale signs of an animal to identify exactly what species it is.
How much planning went into the Lewis and Clark trip before you guys got started?
Let's see. I decided on the trip that we would do Lewis and Clark probably in October or November of last year, and we left at the end of June. So it was a good 7 months or so where once I decided on this, I started working out the details. And so the specifics, the first one, of course, is the route. And I decided to follow a route that was put together by the Adventure Cycling Association, which is based in Missoula, Montana. And they publish routes for cyclists all around the United States, and there are lots of different ones, and this was one that they published. So it was great to have all the other trips I did before. I kind of created the route myself. In this case, I had one already prepared, which was very helpful. And then the other preparation are things like just precisely what gear to bring, so what the weather is going to be like. We crossed over 3 mountain passes, so even though it's hot most of the time, we had to bring cold weather gear as well. So I prepare for that, and then making sure that I have a repair kit for the bicycle, et cetera. And then for my kids, also getting them ready. We don't do heavy training, but I do ride. We live in New York City, and we ride our bicycles all around the city, which is the way I help get them, the bicycle skills that they need to do a trip like this.
How's that ACA route? How do you like it? How is it? I know part of it in your blog you talked about the oil boom has had some effect on. Has it had an effect on the ACA part of the route, or can you talk about that?
Sure. The original Adventure Cycling Association Lewis and Clark route went through Lewiston and then due west on Highway 2 in Montana, and they have now recommended against that, and they shifted the route south of the river, kind of through central Montana, which is a little bit off of where Lewis and Clark actually, traveled, but it's the safest route for bicycles. And I went on the original route, assuming that it would still be okay. I mean, we ride in New York City. I'm used to traffic, and so I'm not too intimidated by lots of traffic. But my goodness, Williston, North Dakota has been changed and very much dramatically affected by this oil boom. There are trucks zooming by both directions, trying to rush to make money, and the bicycle is in their way and not welcome at all. So the trick we use is we would wait on the side of the road until all traffic had passed, and then we would ride, and one of the kids would have the truck duty, and when he saw a truck coming from behind, would say, pull over, and we'd pull over and wait for them to pass. We'd ride when there was no traffic, and that's the way we got out of that mess. But my goodness, it was a mess. But otherwise, you asked about the route. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just was going to ask, how many miles did you have to put up with that for?
Oh, that was probably, in the end, maybe 40 miles, 50 miles, where there was a fair amount of traffic. I got off of Highway 2, which was very bad, and went on to Highway 1804, which was not as bad, and then finally made it into Montana, and it tapered off as you went along. But it was, there was the first day of the ride was a mess with all these trucks around and not pleasant at all.
How's the rest of the route been so far?
Yeah, the rest of the route is good. Much of it is through really beautiful countryside, and the problem for a cyclist is where is the next place to get food or water. So I have to plan sometimes, and I have carried a day and a half worth of food and water with us because I didn't think we'd be able to make it anywhere that had any supplies. So it's wonderful. It's wonderfully remote. We've gone to we slept on the top of Glen High Pass. It's a beautiful mountain area. So a lot of the route is, through beautiful places with more animals than humans. And then every so often you do have to get onto a highway, and usually the highway at the shoulder, but sometimes not. And so we use that same technique. If I feel like it's dangerous, we wait until cars are gone and we'll ride again. So it's been fun. But it's great to have their route. Whenever there's a frontage road or a bike path, they'll point it out so you can ride on that instead of being on a main road with traffic.
Have you had a chance to visit the ACA yet?
No, we are going to go there tomorrow. We just arrived in Missoula, Montana an hour ago, and we're going to visit them tomorrow morning.
Fantastic. I was hoping to ask about that, but hopefully you'll have a great time there tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Talk about the bikes that you guys are riding. Tell me a little bit about your gear.
Sure. So I'm riding a Trek 520 touring bicycle, which is a very sturdy bicycle that's designed for this kind of trip. So it can hold heavy panniers full of gear, and it has eyelets built in, so you can have racks on it. So if someone was thinking about doing this and they have a nice carbon fiber racing bike, for example, do not load heavy panniers, heavy bike bags onto a carbon fiber bike. That's a mistake. It eventually something's going to break. But so the Trek 520 is perfect for touring. And then I have my daughter, who is 6 years old, on a Burley Piccolo trailer cycle, and that connects to the rear rack of my bicycle. And she has 7 gears, so she can pedal, or if she wants to sit and rest, she may. And so the trick of cycling with young children, and when you use a trailer cycle, is that you can be working hard, but they can be resting. And so it's not a tandem bicycle where they're pedaling at the same cadence that you are. They have their own gear and their own pedal and can sit back. So she can rest as much as she wants. And then I have behind her, I have a Burley trailer where I put our tent and extra food and other gear. So it's a fairly heavy load, and when we cycle up a mountain, it's a lot of work on my legs. When it's a flat, it's not so bad, but once you feel the climbs immediately. And then my 12-year-old son is on a Trek mountain bike, and he's carrying 2 panniers in the back, about 30 pounds of gear.
So how have you guys been holding up?
Great. It is exhausting. We've been cycling for about a month, and when you ride day after day, our typical ride is about 40 miles, but the longest we've done is 70 miles in a day. And so we're pretty much out, probably 6 to 8 hours a day with, plenty of breaks, but on the road and plenty of hills that wear you down. So what happens is your legs just feel fatigued over time. But you also get in better shape, and so I feel the fatigue, but I'm holding up fine. And my kids, it's remarkable to see kids. I think children are just designed to be outside and exercising much of the day. When we take breaks, I like to sit down. They like to play soccer, or my daughter will do a ballet routine. So it is just this is not too much exercise for children. I will just say it. I know many people think that it would be. But just watch them when they take a break, and they're not lying down next to me. They're off running and playing, so they're doing great.
Now, I read in your blog there's some people that have, I guess, been negative about this trip and the idea of taking your kids along, naysayers, as you call them. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, it is interesting, and my analysis of them is I think some people have a negative reaction to anyone who's doing something outside of the mainstream, and so that's one element. And also, I think there's just concern for the welfare of my children. So I think it's coming from a good place. but it can be expressed very negatively. So I've gotten email where the person said, "What the F is wrong with you?" that kind of thing. Or sometimes people passing us on the road would just look me in the eye and shake their head as if, what are you doing? And to those people, I think they, if they were to pause or have a conversation with me and hear how we're managing this, they'd recognize that there is certainly a way to do a trip like this that would be horrible for children. It could be torture, for them and make them exhausted and all that. But there's also a way to do this where it's wonderful. And, they learn that basically what my children are learning is that they're capable of doing a whole lot more than most adults think they're capable of, and maybe they themselves think they're capable of. And if you internalize that at a young age, then you're going to be okay. You're not bothered by discomfort if you're pursuing a hard goal. That's an important lesson to learn, and that's what I want my children to learn. And as long as I keep them safe, then it's okay. So whenever I'm confronted directly with a naysayer, I just respond politely and say, "Thank you for your concern. I do appreciate it, but I wouldn't do this if I thought it was unhealthy for my children."
Now, you've been reading many nights out of the Lewis and Clark journals as you go. What are you learning from that?
Oh, and the journals are just so great. I recommend them for anyone who hasn't read the journals. They're so interesting, because you get a sense for how rough this trip was for Lewis and Clark and for all the men that they brought along with them, and Sacagawea, and her infant son that she brought along. So the first point of the journals that my kids and I often laugh about is how much easier our trip is than their trip was. So, people talk about how hard it is, to do it the way we're doing it, but to do it the way Lewis and Clark did it, where they're trying to bring their boats against the current upstream and portaging over prickly pears and up mountains, they really suffered a lot. So that's one thing. It's fascinating to see how they persevered. The other thing that's amazing is just that all but one survived, and the one who died, Charles Floyd, was just apparently from appendicitis, so he would have died anyway. So it is remarkable, given the number of dangers that they faced from grizzly bears and disease, et cetera, that they were able to survive. So it's just an incredible story. And the other thing what I love about it is that President Jefferson tasked Meriwether Lewis with documenting the plants and animals that he observed. And so it's not only an adventure tale, it's really a scientific exploration. And you see a person, who's never seen a pronghorn before, never seen, a prairie dog before, or a grizzly bear, you call them white bears, describing them. And so you're kind of rediscovering the America before it was settled in a way that's fascinating.
How's the weather been for you?
It's been good in that it's been, most days we're able to cycle as much as we want. It's hot, of course. One day it was 98 degrees, and we had planned to ride about 40 miles that day, and after 12 miles, we just stopped. I thought it was not safe for my children, and we found a bar and came in, had lunch in the bar, and I said, "Do you mind if we just spend the rest of the afternoon inside here with the air conditioning?" And they were happy to let us do it, and we set up our tent behind the building that night. But otherwise, it's been okay for us to ride, and it has barely rained. Every so often, it'll rain for a bit, maybe 10 minutes or something, and then that'll stop and you get dried off. So it is hot and dry out here, but much of the time it's been perfectly rideable as long as you're prudent about staying hydrated.
How have the people been that you've been running into and had contact with?
This has been probably the highlight of the trip. When we planned this and when we started on the trip, my expectation was that my children would, one, have a fun bicycle adventure with me, and two, learn a lot about Lewis and Clark and American history and the plants and animals and stuff. So that and the Roadkill Project, of course. So I that was all expected, and I thought would be great. But probably the most important part of the trip that they've experienced have been the kindness of strangers. And we've had examples. For example, there was a lightning storm that blew in as we were just about to leave a town, and a young man drove up in his truck and pulled alongside us and said, "Do you want to take shelter in my dad's car wash, just one block up?" And we said, "Absolutely." And in the end, they invited us to sleep in their camper that night. So they rescued us from a storm. And another time, a couple just pulled up in their truck and asked, if we wanted to sleep, set up our tent in the basement of their church in the town where we were headed. And so we did that, et cetera. I mean, I can go on and on of strangers just approaching us and asking if we need help. And it's a really wonderful lesson for my children to witness that, most human beings are kind and interested in helping others who are in need. And what I tell my kids is, if we need help, accept it and show your gratitude. And then when you're in a position to help someone else, then you do that as well. And, most people are that way. And you do need to be careful. There's some, people out there you need to avoid. But the vast majority are very kind. And I think that's a good lesson for my children to learn.
What's your best piece of advice for someone that wants to follow in your footsteps here?
Well, I would say prepare as much as you can. There are plenty of mistakes that you can make if you just dive in. I think there's a lot of people who do cycling trips. Sometimes I meet people who just decide, next week I'm going to ride across America. Just go do it. And if it's just you by yourself, maybe that's part of the adventure. But if you have children, then it's your responsibility to keep them safe. And so before I cycled across Japan with my son, when I had never done anything like that before, I spent about a year reading as much as I could of other accounts of cycling journeys, and I read information on the Adventure Cycling Association website about things to bring, and the most important element was just how do I do this in a way that keeps my children safe, and that is the priority above all else, of course. And there is a way to do it, but you just need to research and prepare and then use good judgment. And an example would be, I don't make reservations except at the very end. So I know when I'm flying back home at the end of this trip, everything in between is flexible. And if you have a hotel reservation 80 miles down the road and your children are suffering in the heat, that you force them to continue because you want to make that hotel reservation, that's a mistake. So learn to be flexible and set yourself up with a tent and all the supplies you need so that at any point you can change your plan and stop if you need to, like we did that day when it's too hot. Or if you need someone who tells you to go a different route because it's more interesting, you can do that. But allow yourself to be as flexible as possible. But preparation is very important, and talking to people and reading about these kinds of trips is key to making sure that you're safe and your children are safe.
Charles, how did you meet your wife?
We met in graduate school in Boston, and she is from Japan, and I had just returned from 2 years in Japan. So we had that in common, and fell in love, and then eventually married, and had both of our kids. And in fact, that first trip across Japan with my son Sho, part of the reason of that to go to Japan was so that he would have some more exposure to that side of his heritage. And his name, Sho, means to fly or to soar in Japanese, and my daughter's name, Saya, means field of blossoms in Japanese. But my wife has been very supportive of these trips. She when I rode across Japan with my son, our daughter was only 2, so she took care of our daughter while we did that. But the trip around Iceland, she came out and rode 3 weeks with us on bicycles, the final 3 weeks of that trip. And when we were in Europe, she works for the United Nations, and she was on mission in Tripoli in Libya at that time. So she flew out and met us in Paris, but was not able to join us. And for this trip, she's going to meet us in Oregon at the end and ride the final part. But it's very important. You asked before about what different elements of preparation for a trip like this. It's very important to have a spouse who's supportive, and she's been great in allowing me to take the kids and trusting my judgment, and then also being a part of the experience.
Charles, what's next for you?
Oh, well, we'll see. What I always do is I kind of focus when I'm in the middle of an adventure. I focus on that. I have a list of potential next adventures. So, for example, we've talked about cycling in Madagascar or the length of Vietnam or in Bhutan, and those are all possibilities. Even North Korea is on the list. Believe it or not, they allow Americans to cycle there. You have to have a government minder on a moped, tracking you the whole time, and they shake their head and wonder why you're doing it the hard way. But so I look for places that are interesting either from the point of view of interesting nature or politically or culturally. And I see if I can pull it off and have it share another adventure that's very memorable for my kids.
How can people contact you?
Let's see. We have a blog. The blog where you mentioned at the beginning is familyadventureguide.blogspot.com, and so you can kind of see where we are. And I have my email address there, which is familyadventureguy@gmail.com. But you can go to that blog and get the latest and see what's going on there if you like.
Okay, Charles Scott, thank you very much for talking to me and taking time out of your adventure to tell me the story, and appreciate it. And I wish you and Sho and Saya good luck on the rest of your journey.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure and an honor to be invited.
Recorded August 7, 2013. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.